It was late at night, and I was driving through a part of the country I didn't know well. I had been on the road for hours, trying to get to my destination before dawn. The highway was deserted, and the silence outside was only broken by the soft hum of my car's engine. I wasn't sure how long I had been driving when I noticed the gas gauge. The needle was almost on empty. I hadn't seen a gas station in ages, and the thought of running out of gas in the middle of nowhere filled me with dread. Just as I started to panic, a sign appeared on the side of the road. It was old and weathered, with fading letters that read, "Last stop gas, 2 miles." Relieved, I followed the road, which led to a small, isolated gas station. The place looked ancient. The sign above the station was barely hanging on, and the pumps looked like they hadn't been updated in decades. There were no other cars around, and the entire place was eerily quiet. I pulled up to one of the pumps, and as I stepped out of the car, I noticed the air felt different. It was thick, heavy, almost like I was breathing something other than air. I shivered, telling myself it was just the isolation that was making me feel uneasy. I tried to pump gas, but the machine wouldn't start. Annoyed, I walked toward the small building that served as a convenience store. The windows were grimy, and the door creaked as I pushed it open. Inside it was dark, and the only light came from a dim bulb hanging from the ceiling. "Hello?" I called out. There was no answer. The store was as run down as the rest of the station. Shelves were mostly empty, and what little merchandise was there looked old, covered in dust. I approached the counter, where an old-fashioned cash register sat. There was a small bell on the counter, so I rang it, hoping someone would come out. After a few moments, I heard shuffling from the back room. A man emerged from behind a curtain. He was tall and gaunt, with gray hair and a face that looked like it hadn't seen sunlight in years. His eyes were dark, almost hollow, and he moved slowly, deliberately. "Need gas?" he asked in a voice that was little more than a raspy whisper. "Yeah, the pump isn't working," I replied, trying to hide the unease in my voice. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he stared at me for a moment, as if trying to decide something. Then, with a slow nod, he reached under the counter and pulled out a set of keys. "Follow me," he said, turning toward the door. I followed him outside, where he unlocked a panel on the pump and started it up manually. The pump whirred to life, and I quickly began fueling up my car. As I stood there, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. The old man was watching me, standing a few feet away, his eyes never leaving me. His gaze felt almost predatory, and I could feel my skin crawling under his stare. "You're the first customer we've had in a while," he said, breaking the silence. His voice was low, almost too soft to hear. "Oh? I guess not many people come through here anymore," I said, trying to make small talk, even though I desperately wanted to leave. "No," he replied, his lips curling into a faint smile. "Not many." I finished pumping the gas as quickly as I could, thanked him, and got back into my car. As I started the engine, the old man's smile grew wider, and for a moment, I thought I saw something strange in his eyes, something inhuman. I drove away, my heart pounding. I didn't look back. All I could think about was putting as much distance between myself and that gas station as possible. After a few miles, I started to calm down. I told myself I was just overreacting, that the old man was probably just lonely, and the station was just an old, creepy place. But then I glanced in the rearview mirror. In the distance where the gas station had been, there was nothing. No building, no lights, just an empty stretch of road. My blood ran cold. I slowed the car, trying to make sense of what I was seeing, or rather, what I wasn't seeing. I pulled over to the side of the road and checked my GPS, but it was blank. No signal. I tried to remember exactly how far back the station was, but my memory felt hazy, like I couldn't quite recall the details. I got out of the car and looked down the road. The gas station should have been visible from here, but there was nothing. Just darkness. A chill ran down my spine as I realized I couldn't remember the name on the sign. Couldn't remember any details of the station itself, other than the strange old man and his hollow eyes. I got back into the car, locking the doors behind me. I didn't know what had happened back there, but I knew one thing for sure: whatever that gas station was, it wasn't real, and I was never supposed to leave. It was late at night, and I was driving down an empty highway. The road stretched out in front of me, with nothing but darkness on either side. My gas gauge was getting low, but I didn't want to stop. I was too tired and too close to home. I told myself I'd make it, even though the little warning light had just turned on. I kept driving, the road seeming to get longer with every mile. The radio wasn't working, and my phone had no signal. It was just me, the hum of the engine, and the sound of tires on pavement. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a gas station up ahead. It appeared suddenly, like it hadn't been there a second ago. Its neon sign flickered, casting a faint green glow over the pumps. The place looked old and run down, like it had been abandoned for years. But there were lights on inside, and I could see a figure moving behind the counter. I slowed down almost without thinking, but something in my gut told me not to stop. I didn't know why, but the place felt wrong. The air around it seemed heavier, like the world was holding its breath. I kept driving, deciding I could push through to the next town. As I passed the gas station, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The figure inside was standing at the window, watching me. It was a man, but his features were blurred in the dim light. I couldn't see his face, but I could feel his eyes on me. A chill ran down my spine, and I pressed down on the gas pedal, wanting to get away. A few minutes later, my car's warning light started blinking more urgently. The gas gauge was almost on empty, and there was still no sign of the next town. I cursed under my breath and glanced back at the highway behind me. The gas station was nowhere in sight. I kept going, trying to ignore the uneasy feeling creeping up my neck. The road was so empty, so dark. It felt like I was the only person left in the world. After what felt like forever, I saw something up ahead, a faint light. Relief washed over me as I realized it was another gas station. But as I got closer, my stomach dropped. It was the same gas station. The same flickering neon sign, the same old pumps, the same lights inside. I hadn't turned around, I was sure of it. But here it was, the exact same station I had just passed. The same man was standing at the window, still watching me. I didn't slow down this time. I floored the gas pedal and sped past the station, my heart racing. Something was wrong, very wrong. I needed to get out of there, and fast. But no matter how far I drove, the gas gauge kept dropping. I kept expecting the engine to sputter and die, but it didn't. The road just went on and on with no signs, no exits, and no other cars. I felt trapped, like I was driving in circles. And then, up ahead, I saw it again. The gas station. Exactly the same as before, like it hadn't moved at all. I didn't understand what was happening. It was impossible, but there it was. The same man stood at the window, but this time he was smiling. His mouth was too wide, stretching unnaturally across his face. I gripped the steering wheel tighter and kept driving, refusing to stop. But the farther I went, the more the road seemed to close in on me. The darkness felt thicker, the air heavier, like something was pressing down on me. And then, I saw the lights again. The same gas station, the same flickering sign, the same man. But now, he was outside, standing by the pumps, his eyes fixed on me. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just kept going, even though my gas gauge was almost on empty. I drove for what felt like hours, but the road never changed. It just kept stretching on and on. The same empty darkness, the same creeping feeling that I was being watched. And then, like clockwork, I saw the gas station again. This time, the man was standing in the middle of the road, directly in my path. His smile was gone, replaced by an empty, hollow expression. I swerved to avoid him, nearly losing control of the car, but when I looked in the rearview mirror, he was gone. I don't know how long I've been driving now. The gas gauge is on empty, but the car hasn't stopped. The road never ends, and the gas station keeps appearing over and over again. Every time I pass it, the man is closer, his eyes darker, his smile more twisted. I'm afraid to stop. I'm afraid of what will happen if I do, but I don't know how much longer I can keep driving. It was a quiet night, and I was driving home after a long day at work. The road was empty, stretching out in front of me under the pale glow of the moon. I hadn't passed a car in miles, and the silence was almost eerie. My gas gauge was low, and I knew I needed to find a station soon. Finally, I saw a sign that read, "Gas station, 1 mile." Relieved, I followed the narrow road that led off the highway. The road twisted and turned, and after a minute, I saw the station appear out of the darkness. It was small, old-fashioned, and surrounded by trees that seemed to close in around it. I pulled up to the pump, noticing how quiet it was. There were no other cars, and the only light came from a single flickering bulb above the station. The building looked worn, with peeling paint and cracked windows. But I didn't care. I just wanted to fill up and get back on the road. I got out of the car and tried to start the pump, but nothing happened. I looked around and saw a small sign that read, "Pay inside first." With a sigh, I headed toward the station's door. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and I stepped inside. The place was dimly lit, with shelves lined with old snacks and drinks. The air was stale, and the smell of dust and mildew hung in the air. There was no one at the counter. "Hello?" I called out, but there was no answer. I walked around the small store looking for an attendant. The place seemed abandoned, but there were fresh footprints in the dust on the floor, leading toward a back room. I hesitated, but then I heard a soft noise, a faint, almost whisper-like sound coming from behind the door. Curiosity got the better of me, and I walked toward the noise. The door to the back room was slightly open, and I pushed it gently. The room was small and cluttered, with old boxes and broken equipment piled up in the corners, but there was no one there. I turned to leave, but the door suddenly slammed shut behind me, trapping me inside. Panic surged through me as I tried to open it, but the handle wouldn't budge. The soft whispering noise grew louder, surrounding me from all sides. I backed away from the door, my heart pounding. The room was dark, but in the dim light, I could see something moving in the shadows. It was hard to make out, but it looked like a figure, hunched over and crawling toward me. I froze, unable to move as the figure came closer. It was muttering something, the words too garbled to understand. As it got nearer, I could see its face, pale, gaunt, with hollow eyes that seemed to stare right through me. "Why did you come here?" the figure whispered, its voice echoing in the small room. I just needed gas," I stammered, backing up until I hit the wall. The figure stopped, its hollow eyes locked onto mine. Then, slowly, it began to smile, a twisted, unnatural grin that sent chills down my spine. "There is no gas here," it whispered. "Only darkness." The lights flickered, and for a moment, everything went black. When the lights came back on, the figure was gone, but the door was open. I didn't waste a second. I bolted out of the room, through the store, and back to my car. I jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and sped away, not caring about the gas anymore. As I looked back in the rearview mirror, the station was swallowed by the darkness, disappearing as if it had never been there. I didn't stop driving until I reached the next town, my hands shaking on the steering wheel. I filled up at a brightly lit station with other cars around and people talking. It felt safe, normal. But I'll never forget that silent gas station in the middle of nowhere, or the figure with the hollow eyes. And every time I drive at night, I can't help but feel like it's still out there, waiting for the next traveler who makes the mistake of stopping.